Welcome back, everyone. In this video, I want to address probably one of the most common questions that I've had in the 16 years that I've done this channel. It's something that is actually quite fascinating. I want to talk about how to grow as a photographer. This is actually a fascinating question because I've heard it from people of all skill levels. Obviously, you hear that from beginners, people who are just starting to get serious, but then you also get it from people who've been shooting for a long time. And I think part of the equation here is that as photographers, a lot of us are just self-taught. And so it's really easy to plateau and try to figure out, well, what's my next level and how do I get there? And you're trying to figure that. I mean, I do that constantly in my own work. And so I'm going to approach this today. I'm going to tell you what has worked for me in the past and what I like to tell people. And I'm going to actually address this in two parts. The first part is going to be a mindset shift and things you can start thinking about a little bit differently. And the second part is how you can actually put this into action starting today. So the first thing I want to address is mindset. And I think one thing that makes it extremely hard is that when you use terms like, I want to grow as a photographer, what does that mean? It's just a little bit on the general side of things. And so for different people, it's going to mean different things. I want to take better pictures. Well, that's still a little nebulous. You need to kind of start to define that. I want to start working with this type of subject matter. I want to start experimenting with this type of lighting. Now, those are more specific, and those are things we can kind of roll with. And I think the other part of this is understanding what your own personal limitations are or what they're not. And this is something that's interesting. I think it's really easy to understand, well, I have limits. I only shoot in my neighborhood because I can't get out for whatever reason. And that's one way of restricting yourself. But I think putting limits on and shooting within that context starts to open up a new door. For example, I remember I did an online workshop listening to Keith Carter not too long ago, a couple months ago. One of the things that he mentioned in there that I think is just the perfect exercise is that, okay, one thing that's really difficult, that is a great exercise if you don't know where to start, is go take 12 photographs within a mile from your house. It's something you can do on foot, you can do it in the daytime, try to make them interesting. That's a really interesting challenge, and it's a very difficult challenge when you start to get into it. Another one that I want to share with you is during the pandemic, so this was 2020, I had an opportunity to study with Ralph Gibson one-on-one. We would do these Zoom calls. It was part of his Advancing Photographer workshop. And it was something that I did just for myself. I was in a place where all of a sudden, pandemic, we've got a little more time on our hands. We're looking for something to do, it's the time to improve oneself. And so that's why I did that. And it was very personal. I didn't really talk about it in the channel at all. But it was interesting because the last day that we were doing that, we were talking and he was giving me some parting advice. And he said, one thing, he said, I see all that stuff behind you, and what in this studio was in another one. But because of the nature of this job, I end up with a lot of loaner gear and there's stuff everywhere. I have a lot of lenses too. He said, you're going to get rid of all that stuff behind you. You're going to do everything with a rangefinder and a 50mm lens. I thought this was just a fascinating idea, and I actually acted on that. So for the entire rest of the year in 2020 and then the entire year in 2021, I limited myself to one camera and one manual focus lens, and it was a 50mm lens. The whole thing about this is these were restrictions that I put on myself in terms of my gear, but what was cool about it is I got rid of a lot of distractions, and our industry is full of distractions because, there's a lot of commerce in selling cameras and lenses, and I cover a lot on this channel. But this is different because you're taking that mindset, you're establishing a really tight set of parameters where I'm just going to do a manual focus lens of one focal length, and that's all I'm going to shoot on all year. This was extremely liberating for me, and I took it to heart, and I felt that my work started improving in a way because all of a sudden I wasn't spending time trying to figure out, well, what lens do I want to use on this? What do I want to bring on a trip? I would just throw the camera in the bag and I would go. The other thing that I learned from all this is that autofocus, as convenient as it is really not something that anybody needs. Turning a lens and getting something into focus is really not that difficult. I was also starting to see my work in terms of f-stops, and when I needed more depth of field, focusing becomes considerably easier when you do that, when you're stopping down. And so I was thinking about it much differently rather than just relying on an algorithm of autofocus to get me my final result. And you can do this with anything. I mean, it can be a cheap film camera and a 50mm lens. It can be a nice digital camera, but restrict yourself. Like, get rid of those options. And it's a hard discipline. You've got to stick to it, but you'd be surprised what happens in your work. Another story I want to share with you on this that I think is kind of funny is I was told one time that, that's an interesting exercise, but 50mm is probably the most boring focal length of all. And I thought, well, wait a minute, it's a focal length. A focal length is not boring. It's a field of view that you're looking at. I mean, this is like, imagine going to a really nice restaurant that you really admire. You love the food there. And then the chef says something like, I don't like to cook with a 10-inch pan. It's really boring. It's a pen. When was the last time you ordered something and even thought about that? It's a tool to get something done. And that's my whole point in all this, is when you restrict those tools, you're going to be forced into creative solutions on things in different kinds of shots. You need that telephoto? Well, you're going to have to get closer. And if you can't get closer, how else can you interpret what it is that you're trying to say visually? If you need a wider angle lens, maybe that is not possible with a 50. So how can I start thinking about reinterpreting what I want to do by just showing a detail of something? Or maybe it's 3 images that work together. So you have to start thinking through these things. This is probably one of the greatest pieces of advice that I've ever had as a photographer. The second piece of advice that I think is strongly valuable is you need to spend time analyzing and looking at your own work. And that may sound obvious, but for me personally, that's something that I didn't do a lot of early on. I would simply take images and I'd look at them, especially back in the film days. I would do my scans and stuff, or maybe I'd print. And, okay, it's in the result that I wanted. This is the same kind of stuff I always shoot. So, okay, fine, fail. And I put it over there, move on. And this is something that is so important, to analyze those images and look at them and spend time with them and ask yourself questions. How could this have been different? Is the light wrong here? Is the composition off here? Is the crop not correct here? Can it be fixed just by cropping and maybe moving sliders around in Lightroom? Maybe, maybe not. But then you start to learn, okay, well, what would have made that image successful? And that's the mindset you want to be in, because the more you do that and the more that you start going through that process of self-analyzation and thinking about it, the more you're going to start to change the way you work when you're taking images. And I think that's really important. So spend time analyzing your own work. And finally, the most important advice that I think I can give to anybody who wants to do creative work is to go look at other work, be inspired by people, and find things that came before you. This is something that's always kind of amazed me about photographers, is that we tend to not do that as much. We might know a few people on Instagram or on social media, but do you know the well-known photographers who came historically before you? Do you know who's working today? This is something that inspired me early on, and a lot of it came from the fact that I started my career as a musician. I was playing guitar when I was in grade school, and that's how you learn, by copying other people, and you'd listen to music all the time, and you're constantly being inspired. And that kind of lived in the music world, and then when I got serious about photography, especially early on in the internet days, when you start getting to know people online and there's the community aspect of it. And it always amazed me that photographers didn't do that. And I think that's something that's so important. If you're going to be inspired, find something that inspires you. And it doesn't necessarily just have to be photography. You can go to an art museum and look at paintings. You can look at sculpture, read books, look at movies, anything that's going to inspire you and make you think. And then that's what helps you kind of start thinking, you define who you are and you start to come up with artistic concepts and things that you want to express. Sometimes they come out in a different form, even though it was inspired by something. Sometimes you're just trying to copy a style, or you're trying to learn lighting, or there's something that you can get from looking at other people's work. So analyzing your own work is really important, but it's really important to look outside of that and get to other things. So now we've talked about the mindset stuff. Now let's talk about how we can start putting this into actionable steps. So the first thing I would strongly recommend is that you find somebody that you can learn from, and it could be a mentor figure, somebody you know. If you don't know anybody, take a workshop. There are many available. It doesn't have to be with somebody like me, although that would be cool. And speaking of, I have just announced all of the workshops that I'm planning for 2024 so far. So you can go over to my website and check that out. But we've got some cool stuff planned. So first up, and there's going to be 2 different sessions with 2 different sets of dates to make it more convenient, but I'm going to do a series of zine workshops. So if you're not familiar with zines, this is part of the mail time videos I get. A lot of people send in zines, and a lot of people ask me, how do I make my own zine? A zine is essentially a small magazine, or you can think of it as a short form book. But it'll be 4 sessions, and we're going to do these live, so they'll be on Zoom. So as a class, we'll get together during the 4 weeks, and the third session is going to be really interesting. And what's cool about the third session is that'll give you an opportunity to break into smaller groups, and I'll go not one-on-one, but like, 1 on 3 to 5, and we'll look at each other's work, we'll learn from it, and you're going to build a project through this course. I think it's going to be really cool, and by the end, you'll have something that you're ready to print. And we're going to talk about everything in here, from work selection to, how you want to choose your images, to layout, what's going to work, what's going to be clean, what's going to be legible and really speak volumes to the project that you're creating. And then we're going to look at ideas and how you talk to printers, how you find a printer, options that are available. And some of these are very inexpensive, and you can spend a lot of money on them too. But we're going to cover all of this stuff in the zine workshop. So there's going to be 2 sessions. The first one's going to be in January. The second one is going to be in April. And so for more information, I'll put the links in the show description below this video, or you can click here if a QR code works best for you. But would love to have you join us on those. So that's the first thing that I've got planned. The second workshop, and this is something I've been working on for a long time, and I'm really really excited to share this with you. So the first one is going to be a Zoom, so you can do that from home. The second one is actually in person. I'm going to be doing a workshop with Ralph Gibson in New York City. The dates on this is going to be from April 5th to the 7th. Again, all the information will be on the website, and I will put a link below in the show description. But this is going to be a lot of fun. Ralph and I have been working on this for a long time. A couple of months ago, we did an online Zoom thing. It was a virtual studio visit at Ralph's studio. I went to New York, and we did a broadcast from that. We had a bunch of people there, and it was awesome. We had a great time. This is going to be kind of, well, we're calling it the next step. And we were talking about this and what we wanted to do. And a lot of photographers, exactly what we're talking about in this video, they're trying to figure out what that next step is. How do I grow? What is the next thing that I can do as a photographer? And this workshop will address that. You will come work with Ralph and I, you both in sessions, and then we'll have some one-on-one time. We're going to look at your work. You will be building a portfolio of work during that weekend in New York. And we've got a lot of stuff planned. We're going to do an in-studio thing. We're going to do some stuff that's outdoors and very New York and very, not necessarily street photography. It'll be more defined than that. But we've got a lot of stuff planned. And if you want to take that next step, I strongly recommend this workshop. This is the other thing too. I can attest, because I have studied with Ralph, that he is just unbelievably good as a teacher. There's a lot that you can glean from him. He's full of little zingers and information, but he also really cares about helping people find ways that they can improve their own work. And that's something that I really value about my friendship with Ralph, obviously from my own personal side, but this is something that I would recommend for anybody. And you can just do a deposit on that workshop and pay in full before, but all the information will be in that. But like I said, you don't have to study with us or me, but study with somebody. Find somebody you can learn from. That's when things start to speed up. Yes, you can be self-taught in photography, and you can experiment, and you can make mistakes, and you can kind of go through that process. I've done both, and for me, it's so much faster, and you get much quicker results when you actually study with somebody in person that you respect, that you look up to, that can relate to you and your work and see where you're trying to go. And so, like I said, that doesn't have to be me, but find somebody to study with. I think that is the most important thing that you can put into action. And finally, keep an eye on this channel. I'm going to change things a little bit for 2024. In the last couple months, I got burnt out at the end of the summer, but then I started getting really inspired recently, and I have a lot of things that I want to do in the coming year. This is a great time to do it. I don't want to call it New Year's resolution because I hate that term. They never get done. But in terms of what I want to see done in 2024, and on this channel over the years, we've done a lot of things. We've done photo assignments. Those are all still up. I review mail when people send things in, and I like the idea of involving the audience as much as I can. So we're going to be doing a lot more cool things in 2024. But if there's anything you'd like to see or any suggestions you'd like to make, please leave me a comment, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.